talk about aromatase inhibitors and how they are vastly overprescribed in the testosterone replacement therapy world. All the emerging literature has really shown us in the last 10, 20-ish years is that serum estradiol levels really don't mean anything, to be quite honest with you. So think of this. When you introduce exogenous testosterone, some of that will be aromatized. We know that. We fully expect that there will be aromatization of testosterone. This can occur in vast numbers of tissues, skeletal muscle, cardiac tissue, your vascular tissue, your brain, and obviously your fat tissue. And when that aromatization process is complete, what you see on these serum levels is essentially what's leached out after being used at the various tissue levels. So when you look at the serum level, it really doesn't mean anything. And another thing to think about is the fact that we know that estradiol's benefits. We know that its actions, it exerts itself at the tissue level. You can't measure tissue activity and you can't extrapolate blood levels to tissue activity either. Estradiol in itself is an anti-inflammatory, it's an antioxidant, it helps lower blood glucose, it insulin sensitizes you. It also increases bone mineral density. It's actually speculated that a lot of the vast majority of benefits from testosterone replacement therapy actually come from the estradiol itself. And let us not forget that the estradiol itself is actually one of the mechanisms that stimulates the production of GH and therefore the downstream product, which is IGF-1. Here's a few pieces of literature that I also want to talk about as well. First one, what they found was that there was actually no negative relationship between estradiol levels as defined as high, and in this study, high was defined as 42 picograms or higher. So they found no negative relationship between estrogen above 42 and decreased and or poor libido. So 30% of these guys were given medications that they didn't need out of the pure fear that they might get something that's genetically derived anyway. This next piece of literature defined how inconsistent and actually unreliable the estradiol measurements themselves are. The authors identified that there's inconsistencies, especially in the populations of men, children, and postmenopausal women. Even when using the LCMS test to identify E2 levels, the authors identified there's upwards of 10 times variance from what the levels actually truly are. They also identified that the E2 measurements could also pick up upwards of 100-ish metabolites of estradiol, which also include the xenoestrogens, environmental estrogens. The next piece of literature actually evaluated 12 randomized controlled trials, and what they were comparing were an aromatase inhibitor versus placebo, or aromatase inhibitors versus testosterone. And one of the outcomes they wanted to identify were there actual symptomatic improvements in any of the groups? Well, lo and behold, the groups that were on testosterone actually demonstrated symptomatic improvement of low testosterone symptoms. Obviously, that's what you would expect. The AI groups did not demonstrate any kind of symptomatic improvement. Well, we didn't expect that. But one of the negative outcomes, what I really wanted to point to, was as early as 12 months, there were actually deleterious effects identified in the AI groups. And what they found was as early as 12 months, there was some reduction of bone mineral density in the lumbar spine. The reason why I really wanted to identify that is because there's people who say, what is the harm in blocking estrogen? What's the harm in just taking an AI? It's not going to hurt anything. But there are negative consequences to doing so, and they can be identified as quick as a year. And the second piece I really wanted to drive home was that measuring estradiol, it doesn't really tell us anything. Ultimately, this is a hormone that works on a tissue level, and that's not something that we can evaluate. So honestly, there's not any literature that really warrants or suggests that we should warrant drawing estradiol levels, honestly.